Let's say I've got a design agency and really I want to be working with 60, 70, 100 grand budgets.
If you really want to get leaders or stakeholders on board, one, involve them early, get the fears on the table. Two, one of the hardest things is to give up the notion that you're an expert. What are sort of challenges they are really facing in the business? How much pain has been brought to bear? Because the more pain those individuals are feeling, the more opportunity generally there is for you, and the easier it is to make that sale. So you've got to be able to talk about growth or retention. No good talking about awareness or consideration or eyeballs. The execs don't care about that. That's to them such a detached concept that would never make it onto any of the board reports.
What are some of the things that you found to be effective in communicating the value of this process?
I think
Are you currently using design thinking in your business? If not, you might be missing a trick. Today, I'm speaking with Matt Anderson, who is a design consultant from Australia. One of the reasons I invited Matt onto this podcast is because he has spent the last 20 years in operational roles within some of the world's biggest corporates, including being the chief operations officer for Virgin Mobile Australia. Most creatives do not have an operational and logistical way of thinking. And so in today's episode, I'm picking Matt's brains on how we can use design thinking to communicate the value of design better, to win higher value clients, and ensure that we are actually solving real problems with our design and creative skills. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button and share it with a friend. Matt, what is design thinking exactly?
Well, my take on design thinking is it's a problem-solving approach that actually focuses very much on the people part of the equation, the emotions, the deep empathy for them. It can be a little bit structured at times, but I think it's quite different to most approaches like Lean or Six Sigma. It's one that really excites me simply because you're giving a damn about people, which I think in business is missing so often.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if there are designers listening, which I'm sure there are, why might I consider learning more about design thinking and bringing some of those tools into my toolkit?
I think if you've got designers in background, I'm going to make assumptions that perhaps got more a creative or a visual background from it. When you're trying to get to grips with what's going down in business, the problems are normally people related. You can talk about all the tech you want and all the processes you love, but it's humans at the end of the day that are making the decisions. And so to have in your sort of equipment belt the ability to say, okay, what are the tools or methodologies I could be able to apply in this environment that are going to really allow me to go Sherlock Holmes and understand what's happening in this business, where you're not just looking at the spreadsheets or the numbers, but looking at the habits and the behaviors. That's where design thinking really comes to the forefront.
Okay. And so if we go another layer deeper on that, why is understanding business and understanding humans important as a designer? Why can I not just grow my business and go out, in my career, just learning how to design nice looking things?
Because I think the temptation as humans is we want to have the answers. We want to jump to the solutions that are going through. And I think in business, that's pretty much the fastest way to potato your idea, because it's not actually connected back to a need or problem or a want of the individuals beyond yourself. Now, that's not to say there are some designers who are not absolutely clued in and have a real connection already with their customers and what they're going through or with their staff. But for most of us in business, it takes a little bit of work to really get to grips with what's happening on the shop floor at front line, through to those middle managers, through to the very customers that they're trying to serve. It's really being able to get to grips at a deep level of understanding means that you start to overcome your self-biases or those moments where you think, oh, surely this has got to be the answer here. And boy, that can be tempting. I think that discovery piece is what sets design thinking apart from most other methods or approaches that I've seen. I think the second part is because it is human orientated, where it's trying to be as collective or as inclusive as possible, is the other secret sauce to it. So you're looking at the staff side of things, you're looking at the customer side of things, but you're also trying to recognize where's the shareholder or stakeholder in all of this as well.
Yeah. And when did you first come across this idea of design thinking in your journey?
I was fortunate enough to be working at Virgin Mobile here in Australia. In that environment, I was the COO, and Damien Kernahan from Proto Partners, we engaged him to help us to get to grips with what was happening with our customers in the environment, what we could do to really lift our game. And he was kind enough to introduce me to human-centered design along with design thinking. And it was like a holy cow moment because for many years, I'd spent a lot of time on one side of the ledger trying to figure out the operations, the analytical side. And I really felt there was something missing in that. That was the emotional, the feeling aspect of it. And so the moment you suddenly were able to go, hold on, feelings have a valid place in business. I know it sounds dumb in hindsight, but bloody hell, we'd been missing a lot of that mojo from it. The moment you start designing for feelings or being inclusive of it, you start to see much more creative solutions in the way that you can solve for problems. Because when you're designing for emotions, which I appreciate for many of your audience, that's what they live and breathe on. But we were just looking at the analytical side, the how much time will this take, how much effort would this take, not what's going to make people absolutely wowed by this experience or what's going to have staff go, I so want to hang out here. When you design for feelings, it is a superpower to unlock, but it sure can scare some of your colleagues when you say, we're going to start designing for feelings.
So, if I'm a designer and I have really just been quite traditional in the way that I design in terms of logos and identities and brand and all of that kind of stuff, and although there's elements of design thinking in there, that hasn't been the kind of fundamental way that I approach design. What are some of the first things, if you were teaching me about design thinking, what are some of the first things that you would get me to understand from design thinking principles?
One of the hardest things is to give up the notion that you're an expert, right? And if you spend years and years trying to professionalize or get good at your trade, that can be pretty humbling to go through. And so it's pretty much referred to as the beginner's mindset. And what that brings with it, though, is the ability to be curious as heck the moment you go into a situation where you're going, I'm going to park my assumptions or my biases as much as I can so that I can get hugely curious as to what the heck's going on in this environment. So beginner's mindset, I think, is one of the early principles you want to do. The second part is, whilst many organizations can get super excited by approaches like the double diamond, where you go through a methodical approach, the truth is design thinking is messy as hell. Right? It is one because of that curiosity and that beginner's mindset. You're literally trying to pick up rocks to understand what's happening in this environment. You're trying to be nail down or get as synthesize as much of that information as you possibly can to make sure you've got an understanding where the real problem is that you're solving for. That then gives you an opportunity to hang out with staff, with partners, and with customers to actually co-design the solution. And if you're a graphic designer, you're pretty much hanging out in front of your own computer or your own environment. This is suddenly a little bit scary when, hold on, I'm meant to involve others in the solution and figuring it out. And the important part of doing that is their ideas of the people you involve may be crap. In fact, 96% of it will be dreadful that's going through. But that means that those other individuals feel part of the change. And that's a really important part in business, is getting other people on board with the outcome you want to do. They can also surprise you with different solutions that you'd never considered or thought of. I think once you've got your ideas and you start something, then you want to be able to prototype them so that you have a chance to be able to test them. And this is the next problem with design thinking, is you could be fabulously wrong. Right? It's the fact that you might think, brilliant idea, so going to sell millions of this. And then suddenly you start testing it with live customers and realize how wrong you were. And it's not testing just to be right or wrong. It's actually testing to learn. And that's why that beginner's mindset is so important. You're going to be really curious, okay, what's going on there with this test that we're doing? And then when you want to share the results back with those very stakeholders that engaged you at the beginning of the project, you want to give a real, you're not trying to sell, this is the best thing since sliced bread. You have to be incredibly vulnerable and brave around what learnings came out of this, which may include, that was the dumbest idea we ever came up with because we learned X with the customer. And you're actually investing in learning. That is what design thinking is all about. You're trying to get as fast as possible to get new learning that you didn't have yesterday. And how often do we do that in business, or actually learn where we're thinking we could be wrong? on this.
Absolutely. It sounds to me like these design thinking principles are really fundamental if you are going to create any significant results for a client or for a business, right?
I have a bias. I'm not saying it's the silver bullet at all. And I do think you want to bring all of the designer to the equation. I think the danger is when design thinking can be a big part of it is discovery. And in this day, and so when I mean discovery, I'm talking about whether it be doing interviews, whether you're observing what people are doing out in the lobby of your where your concierges are serving them. It could be people trying to get on a plane and the baggage problems they're having. But discovery is a huge part of it. And it could be so tempting saying, bugger that, we're going to skip over that because we just want to get to the co-design or the solution stage. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have when selling or communicating to shareholders or to stakeholders, the value of discovery and the value of really getting what's the real problem we're solving here. If I had to say what's my number one challenge, it's getting people to fall in love with the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a nice little segue into part two, which is how do we get stakeholders to see the value of design thinking? You've personally worked in some big corporates. So you've really seen the inside, you've been high up, you've been in the boardroom. If I've got maybe even a medium-sized client that has a few stakeholders involved and they're just like, hey, can you just show me what this design is going to look like? And maybe you've presented a budget or a proposal to them and there's a big discovery phase and they're like, oh, can we just not do that and get straight to it? What are some of the things that you found to be effective in communicating the value of this process?
Yes, the trust me, bro, I've got this doesn't quite qualify. That happens when trying to sell design thinking, that's for sure. You just touched on there, we said this big discovery bit, right? And I think this is one of the bits where perhaps I differ a little bit from some of the other design folk that are out there. I think if you're going to sell massive discovery, you're not going to win the business that's coming through. You're going to fall flat. You also don't need big discovery each time. You've got to actually spend a little bit of work with the stakeholders, the sponsors to really understand what is freaking them out, what challenges are they facing, what constraints are already on the table, which is every much around from budget, from time, from access that you'll get to information. Those are design challenges you should embrace, not try and skip around and get quite academic around, we must have 3 months of discovery before we can actually do anything. Business is fast, business is rapid, and if you as a designer can't keep up, you're going to get sidelined real quick. So in terms of trying to get stakeholders or the shareholders on board, I encourage you to run a collaboration brief right up front. Right? This is like your therapy session where you actually have a chance to talk about, okay, you want to achieve these goals and these are your constraints, but you actually need to get to what are they afraid of? What are they really worried could go wrong here? What's really riding on this change that they're about to place? What assumptions have they made going into this work? The more you can get those on the table really early in the engagement, far better chances that you can actually design, and this is an important one, the approach you're going to run for this piece of work. The reason I say design the approach is don't just take a double diamond and say we're rocking and rolling from here. We've got discover, define, we're going to go through the ideate, and then we're going to go on and actually implement. I think you've got to look at, okay, do I need to do interviews? Can I actually run more observations that go in this space? What other methods or information have they already got that I can be able to draw on? Who could I leverage within the organization so the actual process of doing the design is not an external party coming in and telling you what to do. It's actually building the capabilities of the organization. So if you really want to get leaders or stakeholders on board, one, involve them early, get the fears on the table. Two, talk about how you're going to upskill the talent in their business. And that's including for internal designers as well. And the reason I say this is how often do teams kind of work across silos or across departments? Here you've got a real opportunity to get people to figure out what are the real problems from the perspectives of the customers or from the employees using design thinking. So you're going to upskill people's ability to suddenly go Sherlock Holmes on a problem. And that doesn't matter if they're in the planning team, the legal team, the marketing team. Suddenly you're finding a much more human way to connect people together and give a damn about others more than yourself.
Love that. One of the things that you said there, Matt, was this idea of getting the stakeholders' fears out onto the table. And this is something I talk about a lot in sales, really getting to the root of the problem, really getting to the root of the fear or the frustration or whatever it is. A lot of people come to me and they say, it's great, I understand the theory, but when I'm talking to clients, they just don't want to open up to me. They don't want to tell me about any of this stuff. They're very defensive and they're like, oh, just can you send us a proposal? Have you experienced that? And if you have you got any advice on how you kind of get around that?
If you have any of your clients or potential clients that are coming to you just saying, hey, send us a proposal straight out of the bat, we just need to know the dollars, they're not a potential client. They're kicking tires at that point in time.
Yeah.
My encouragement really is you at least need a coffee chat that's going, or an informal environment where you can at least get to know them as a human being, as an individual, because that's the only way trust is going to be established, if there's a little bit of intimacy that's happening. So to me, before you even make your way into a workshop, or God forbid on a Zoom or a Teams environment that's going through, go have a coffee. That is the secret sauce to really unlocking, getting to know another human being, their environment, what's going down. I guarantee if you give people a chance to talk, they'll run a mile. That's going so, but you can't have them talk in front of their peers or in front of their team, because there's already the shields going up, or the defensiveness of, I must sound like I know what I'm talking about, or I must sound like I know what the solution's going to be. Where in fact, most of them are scared witless that they have no clue the answer they've got to the very problem they're facing.
Just getting into the mind of CEOs or maybe marketing managers, as somebody who has been in corporate a lot and now currently works with a lot of corporates, if I was running a design studio and I wanted to get more of those kind of clients, I wanted to get bigger clients, I wanted to get my foot in the door with bigger budgets and maybe have the ability to use some of this kind of design thinking framework, where should I start?
So if you're wanting to win over corporates, corporate's not a thing. It's actually still made up of individuals or beings. You're going to have to find a connection or a way in, which is normally through networks or introductions, at least to have that initial coffee chat we just spoke about. You're really trying to find an anchor where there's enough of a problem in that business relevant to what you feel you could solve for you to be able to add value. If I look at teams or people, they often think, hey, let's go check to the marketing folk, because that's who designers want to hang out. They'll speak creative, we'll speak creative, this will be happy days. Whereas I love to go chat to the boring people. Go chat to the finance folks, like the CFO if possible. Go chat to legal teams. Go chat to the HR, because nobody wants to have a chat to HR, right? These are the folks that have a lot of problems that often struggle to get heard in a way where people often will gloss over or ignore their problems, other than the CFO perhaps. But the reason that they get ignored is because they see the world as very black and white, and things are generally not working for them as well. Design thinking, because of designing for emotion, starts to give them a missing piece of the puzzle. The downside of chatting to boring people is they're normally very conservative, right? They're very analytical. It's like spreadsheet said no. So you need to be able to talk two sort of different dialogues. One is you've got to show that you're familiar and understand the environment, can get the facts, the pressure of time that they're going through. That builds their confidence that you get their world. The second part, though, is about start to offer new insight or new ability around, hey, this is what we're seeing is working with these other brands or these other organizations that are trying it this way, and these are the kind of outcomes they're seeing. That gives them a bit of hope, which is normally what's missing in those roles as well. But if you would jump in there and say, hey, we're going to do design thinking, we're going to rock your world, without having any empathy or any understanding of the environment, you've got Buckley's chance of closing that sale.
If and when I get that person on my side, what's the next step? Like, let's say they're not the decision maker. How do I start bringing these ideas up the ladder?
The key part you're trying to do when you're chatting to them is to figure out what problems are they facing, what's their team facing. It could be what's their department facing, or what's their org facing. So you can kind of ladder up, and really each one of those you could potentially solve for. Each one normally takes a bit more time, a bit more energy, and potentially some bit more dollars on the side. So it's really what level of trust, and more importantly, what level of risk are they prepared to put into this environment? And to do that, there's got to be enough of what they perceive as a payback or a benefit that's going to happen. To me, I feel the more generous you can be in that space, where you get them to generally air what the problem is and show that you understand those perspectives or can connect the dots, the more confident they're going to be to introduce you to the others that are going in that space. If anything, it's even better when they can kind of say, hey, I'm going to introduce you to this individual, and you can ask, tell me about them. What kind of background? What's happening in their environment? What are the headaches you're seeing? What do they like to work with? And that last question, what do they like to work with? That's when you start to get a really secret sauce around, are they pains in the ass, frankly? Are they all black and white that's going to be in the space? Or are they feeling unheard? You need a lead or a hook into that way so that you can be more credible in that space pretty early on.
Yeah, and I guess that's why it's so important to have an understanding of those things. I see a lot of creatives and agencies trying to move into the corporate space and trying to do all these things because they believe that there's just more money there, but they don't really have an understanding of that world or what's going on. And so they really struggle to kind of gain that traction. Is that a misconception in terms of, like, if let's say I've got a design agency and I've got lots of clients, but maybe the budgets are sort of 20, 30 grand. And really I want to be working with 60, 70, 100 grand budgets. Do you think, in your experience, the transition I need to make is into bigger clients, i.e., like more headcount, higher revenue? Or do you think it's about using tools like design thinking to solve a bigger problem for my current clients?
To say that you must be a larger corporate is the only way you can make dollars, or serious dollars that's going in there, I think it's a little bit misleading. I really think it comes back to, or I have a different take. I think it comes back to risk appetite. Like, what are sort of challenges they are really facing in the business? How much pain has been brought to bear? Because the more pain those individuals are feeling, the more opportunity generally there is for you, and that the easier it is to make that sale. I think it'd be very tempting though, say, hey, let's go for the biggest dollars possible in there. Whereas to me, to build trust, to build credibility, the generosity's got to kick in. You've got to find something that's got to feel really tangible, because if you suddenly say 3 months of discovery followed by idea, you're just not going to get that door to open for you. The danger, however, is I see a lot of the snake sales or oilmen, which will be going in there saying, okay, we're going to sell you a workshop, we're going to do discovery in 1 day, we're going to do ideation on the 2nd day, we'll have all your plans by the 3rd, happy days. Good on them for giving that a crack. I don't know how often they're going to be called back in, though. To me, the ability to co-design that very approach right from the beginning, where we talked about the vulnerability, is once you started to unpack the constraints, the times, the challenges with them, this is whiteboard sort of session. You've got the ability to educate or to inform them as to what some of the choices are and the pros and cons that come with this. An example is that they normally say, oh, we want to do a massive survey that's coming. This great. We don't even know why people are doing what they're doing, though, at this point in time. So what would we be asking for that survey? Why is it you feel you want a survey? Oh, my boss loves numbers. My boss loves stats. My boss loves graphs. Okay. Well, we can still visualize it for them. We can still start to show them some of the outcomes that are in that space for them as well, and some of the choices that are going down. But wouldn't they want us to be solving the right problem in the first place? The more I think you can break down what the approach is, what the choices are going to be, and make it feel like they are in control, the more likely you're going to be in a winning position. I think you also need to be really transparent around the costs that are involved. If you always go for the gold-plated version is what you're going to sell to the client, that trust is not going to be there. It's like, what do they need to get the job done? And when it comes to execs, it's like, how scared are they? What's the risk level that they've got to have in that environment? And what pace are they wanting to run at? If you understand risk and pace, it doesn't matter sort of which exec leader you're going to be talking to, you've got a really good shot at building a relationship with them. If your career has been in a creative space where you've had limited opportunity perhaps to get to the execs or to the larger corporates, look through your LinkedIn Rolodex. Who are your friends? Who are the people that you can hang on? Just say, hey, I just want to have a coffee chat to learn and understand about your role. I really want to connect. You'll probably get a hell of a lot of rejections before you'll get a yes, but that one person can really teach you a lot, whether it be around finance or whether it ends up being around legal. Again, start with the boring people. Their diaries are normally a lot more open than those that are pretending to be busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you were talking there, what I heard was very much a kind of collaborative coaching approach. And I think that's the thing that I want to highlight the most from this conversation, is that the way you're approaching this is positioning you as a partner, because you're not going in there saying, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and like ruffling feathers. You're saying, hey, here's a framework, here's a problem, here are some ways we might be able to solve it, and like here are some options. And it's a very much, it feels to me like, as you're explaining it, very much like a kind of choice that they are making and a collaboration that they are creating with you, rather than the feeling like this expert is coming in and kind of telling them what to do all the time. Would you say that's kind of like an accurate description?
I think the days of the blue suits going in there as the experts are saying, this is the answer, have come and gone. The future for business has got to be around inclusive audience where it is collaborative right from the get-go, because that's the only way you get diversity of thought. I mean, if you just put all creatives in one room and all boring folks in the other, that's not when magic's going to really get sparked. The magic of building sustainable businesses of the future that really kick ass is when you start to bring them together. Collaboration is a necessity. It's not optional. I think it means you've got to be less bloody arrogant. It's around, you think I need to have all the answers. It touches on, though, one of the superpowers you need as a designer is the ability to observe, to listen, and be okay with being wrong. If you go into interviews when you're meeting these execs and you want to have those coffees and you're doing all the talking, they're going to think you're an idiot. If they do all the talking, they're going to think you're a genius at that point in time.
And I guess that's why I said it's a bit of a coaching approach, because ultimately that's what coaching is, right? It's being really good at listening and asking questions. And I think it's such an underrated skill. I was taught, definitely, or I was at least led to believe when I was younger, that the expert was the person that had all of the answers. And as I've got older and as I've learned more about experts, and I've had plenty of mentors in my time, I've realized that the people with all of the answers are the ones that you need to be careful of and stay clear of. So, what is it that I have to shift in my mind if I'm a designer that kind of feels this pressure to be an expert in their field and have all the answers? What do I need to shift in order to be able to approach clients from that very like transparent, vulnerable place where it's like, hey, actually, I don't have all of the answers. You have a lot of the answers, and my job is to kind of pull some of them out from you.
Well, I think you touched on it there, Matt, when you talked about the vulnerability. It's takes a hell of a lot of courage to going, I don't have all the answers and I'm going to be curious and go learn. That almost is backwards to many of the studies or many of the roles you're going through. I'm pretty excited, though, to see the results when, if you listen, if you take the time to understand another person's perspective, play back what you think they've heard, what they mean, when they hear their own words, you're far more likely to connect and build that trust. What I like about the trust model, I can't remember who's come up with it. That's terrible of me, but it's like when you talk about it's the credibility plus reliability plus intimacy all over self-orientation. And it's like that intimacy bit often gets kind of glossed over. It's like, do you really understand their perspective in the background? That to me is the secret ingredient there.
How do you build intimacy without letting the client dictate too much of the process or the outcome?
I think at this point in time, it's like use assumptions would be one of my go-tos. David Bland talks about assumptions and experiments. What you're trying to do is saying, okay, let's get all those assumptions out we've got about what we think the problem is, what we think the answer might be, who we think must be involved in this environment, where do we think we could make money. Once you've figured out what you think are your riskiest assumptions, i.e. the ones you think that could really sink this work, then break it down. Okay, what experiments would we need to run? When you're getting those assumptions out on the table, we think the problem is, or we believe the problem is. I'm like, great. What evidence do we have to back that up? And you'll watch so many CEOs, execs backpedal. Oh, I'm sure we've got the evidence. We've got bucket loads of it. Cool. Who would I need to chat to find that evidence in your organization? Oh, go chat to Sally in marketing, or go chat to Tommy in finance going through. Cool. Can I have their email that's going through? And no, within 24 hours of meeting either Sally or Tommy, they're like, shit, we don't have this information at all. Right. And so that's the power of assumptions. Assumptions are much softer approach than having to say, we know all the answers. Like our best guess is we think it's this and we have this evidence or we don't. And the question is that enough evidence for you to feel confident you can make a call to go to the next step or to the next assumption and test that. So I love assumptions, and it works great whether you're finance boffins or creative folks that are coming in that space.
And also, I think assumptions delivered with an air of curiosity, right? So it's like, it's not just, hey, I'm assuming all this stuff. It's like, I'm curious, what makes you think that? Like, I'm curious, where is that assumption or where has that idea come from? Another approach could be, well, these are all just assumptions and you don't have any data to back it up. Like, it's a very different way to come at it, right?
I think on that note is the assumptions. You got the opportunity. What level of evidence do you need to see in order to be confident you'd bet on that or you'd make that move? And we were working with a large cruise company that's going through a holiday cruises, and they were talking about what lighting they needed to put into the cabin that was going through. And it was the COO was chatting to the team saying, I need you to be able to check this is going to work and that people can be able to see. And so the staff thought that meant that they needed to do a whole massive study, figuring out different lights, kind of working through different scenarios. All he wanted them to do was to turn the bloody light on and see if they could find their way to the toilet that's going through. So massive differences in expectations that were going through. So I really think being clear around what level of evidence would you need to see to back that assumption really helps the team, that's the design team, and the exec team get a lot closer on the level of trust that they need.
Yeah, it's a great question as like a sales question as well. Like, what would you need to see to be confident that we were the right partners to work with you on this? Like, you're literally just pulling that out directly from their brain and getting them to search for that. Because I think otherwise, a lot of the time, we feel like we just have to say stuff to somebody in order to kind of keep the conversation going, or, oh, well, we just need to have a think about budget and blah, 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 and just stuff that we just say almost, like we just kind of parrot, because it's like, oh, well, that's the thing that you say at the end of a sales conversation, or that's the thing that you say when you don't want to kind of really tell somebody what's going on. So a question I've got for you is, you've worked in a lot of big corporates. What are a few lessons that you have learned from that experience that you now bring in to the work that you do today?
Having worked for corporates and also have them as clients, they're normally frustrated, right? The higher you get up is like the pace is not there that the teams have, or they feel that people are working on the wrong items. I think Atlassian here in Australia just recently did a study, and they said something like 92% of execs said that they believed that the majority of work that the teams are working on was the wrong stuff. Like, it's a stunning sort of stat. It's like, well, kind of makes you worry. How are leaders not communicating to their teams what they want them to work on? And I think that brings to the next problem, that when you're in the ivory tower and you got the shop floor, you got to work with middle management to be able to get a lot of that comms to kind of out there and stick. Middle management are really struggling at the moment. And so they are challenged between what senior execs are asking them to do and what the shop floor are saying they're prepared to do. And so often from a designer's perspective, one of the best things you can do is go hang out with some of the middle managers. Go figure out what's scaring the living daylights out of them. They are more stressed than any other role in the business. And if you can make their life even moderately better than what it was yesterday, they're going to love you and they will promote you to the execs. They will willingly give you some of those opportunities. But I think in corporates, coming back to your question around the kind of challenges, I've talked on speed, I've talked on risk. As the economies start to get a little bit more colorful, I think then it's like, okay, how do we drive cost out? How do we drive efficiency? How do we drive productivity? If you look at any of the investment that's going in, normally it has efficiency being how the business case is going to be written. Unfortunately, that normally scares staff though. And that kind of creates one of the biggest challenge for corporates is, how do I take my teams on this journey with me of change when I'm not quite sure what the future is and I need to find some way to save some money along the way?
And often, I think design services and creative services in general are some of the first to be cut because they're seen as a nice to have. Do you have any other advice, or do you want to dig into any of these kind of design thinking principles in any way that helps our creative services to not be seen as a nice to have and to be seen as more of an essential?
For me, the creatives, when you're saying, or design, I think you're spot on to call out they're normally the first services to get cut, because the value proposition that's normally going is it's perceived, it's creative, it's fun, it's soft, therefore it's not going to have a factual or a hard impact, which couldn't be further from the truth. But that's the perception. And so, okay, that's what we've got to work with. So for me, the best thing you can do is think about the language that you're actually using to communicate your very services. Like, you need to be able to talk about productivity. You need to be able to talk about efficiency. You need to talk about effort and time from their staff's perspective or the customers. You got to be able to talk about growth or retention. No good talking about awareness or consideration or eyeballs. The execs don't care about that. That's to them such a detached concept that would never make it onto any of the board reports. So I think the more you can be about the outcomes that you're helping to enable directly is an important part of having credibility with the exec suite. The problem you might have, though, is, okay, but I'm a creative. How the heck do I talk about some of these hard numbers? Well, this is the part where you really got to be able to break. What problems do you feel that you could solve as a creative? And often it's your approach is the secret sauce, or it's your approach that's different. But you don't need to tell people that's the case. It's more about, what's the problem? How could I draw it? How could I back solve from that problem? Is really where I think creatives struggle, because they can't articulate the process or the approach they go through, other than we're really creative, smart people who figure out stuff behind closed doors. Well, that doesn't sound very reliable. So break it down, break it into chunks that the exec team can get their head around.
Nice. I like that. There's a couple more things I just want to dig into before we wrap up. But what I am essentially hearing is kind of aligned with a lot of my thinking and going down the route of experimenting and having assumptions and all of that. It's nice to kind of have some of those ideas confirmed. And one of them you just spoke about was, ultimately you have to meet people where they are. And that is really around their frustrations, their challenges, their problems. And it's still a massive mindset shift for most of my clients when they have to go from this business that they've kind of built fairly organically because people have a need and they come to them and they want this specific skill that they have, to actually actively going out and building relationships with people and getting the attention of these people who are maybe slightly earlier on in the buying process, to actually be able to position themselves as this kind of creative partner rather than just this worker. So if you were using design thinking to connect with people based on where they're at and the kind of pain points and frustrations they have right now, how would you approach that, or what tools would you use?
One of the things you just touched on there, Matt, was about creatives feeling that they're not early enough kind of in the conversation that's going to happen. By the time we've got to me, the project's this big or the brief's this small at that point. If only we could get earlier. One of the advantages design thinking gives you is allows you to tackle a really wide range of problems, whether you're designing businesses, whether you're designing services, whether you're designing for the digital environments. So I think it gives you a wide field to be able to play in. One of the most interesting things that happens when you meet with execs is they'll want to sound knowledgeable about design, right? They'll want to say they already know the space. And so you'll hear very often, oh, customer journey mapping. Yes, we've got one of those, or we need one of those. The customer journey mapping is a way of being able to draw essentially what the customer's experience looks like as they hang out with you or with your partners that are going through, and showing the highs and lows and the opportunities for you to be able to make the experience better for them. So one of the tools often that wants to get sold in there is journey mapping, because it's a really easy way to get the staff to be able to draw up customers' data to go up there, the operational lens. But what doesn't often get talked about is, hold on, those ingredients are all coming for really different parts of the business. And so it actually allows you to have a language or a common to be shared across the teams. Think about how many silos you've kind of got in your business. No one wants to normally admit that. But the fact that if you can suddenly show what does it really look like across those teams from a customer's perspective. For example, if you're trying to buy a car and you'll go meet the fabulous sales team, you'll go for a drive, it's brilliant, you're in an absolute emotional high. Then they'll give you to the upsales team once they've done the sale. Oh, by the way, we'll just get you some nicer tires. But if they don't even know what the sales team has already sold, suddenly have a disconnect. Suddenly you go to the finance team. It's like your experience is just getting shittier as you're going through that whole experience, right? Where they didn't even look at how many miles you've already spoken to the salesperson about. So you're repeating all that information. Journey mapping is one of the best things you can do to actually stay connected across different silos to understand from your customer's perspective. The only problem is because it's become so overused, so a lot of your creatives or the sales that are, I'll go sell a journey map. The chances are your client will already have it. If they do, then the pivot for your team is, great. So what decisions have you made differently, or what insights came from that has allowed you to do something different today than you did yesterday? And if they say, well, not a lot, or more likely, we didn't know where to start. And that's the problem with journey maps. They just bring a whole wealth of information. So again, the next opportunity for your team is, well, we could help you to be able to prioritize which stuff actually makes a damn to your customers and to your people and to those finance folk. We don't just look at it from one lens, we look at it from all three. That's when you start to get pulled more into the conversation, is because you're taking a 360-degree view, design thinking, not just a financial lens like Lean Six Sigma that's coming in there, not just a, hey, we're going to be kumbaya with the customers on a creative lens from it, or not just about the staff where it's just a feasibility, okay, what's it going to take from an agile lens? It really has to bring all three together of the viability, the feasibility, along with the desirability in order for it to fire.
I'm sold on design thinking. Where do I start? Like, what books can I read? What people can I follow? How do I start educating myself better and using design thinking as a tool?
Design thinking has been around for a bloody long period of time. There is plenty online, both on YouTube. If you type in design thinking, type in human-centered design, you'll start to see a wealth of methods. IDEO has for a long time been recognized as the pinnacle in the space. Some of that gloss has certainly come off. Frog Design has done a lot of work in this area as well. The best one, though, is read a little, play a lot. And that's what design thinking is about, is bringing some of that fun, that joy back, where you can actually look at, how do we be wrong? How do we unpack this? Let's draw it. Let's grab a whiteboard. Let's grab Lego and plastic and see what that's going to look like. And that can be a bit scary for execs saying, hold on, you're playing on work time that's going in space. But that's the whole point. When you're having fun, but doing it on the real problems that are going through, that's when creativity with value or creativity with impact really starts to cut through. Most people hate their jobs. Most people don't. So the moment you can come into an organization and say, we've got a creative approach that has substance, that can quickly work towards impact, the doors start to get opened a bit more.
Amazing. Matt, where can people find out more about you if they enjoyed this episode?
Just jumped on LinkedIn. Go find me there under Matt Anderson, or jump on thinkstartup.com.au. We write a newsletter called Corporate Therapy because there's enough dumb stuff that organizations are doing that plenty of material to work on.
Nice. I will put those in the show notes below. Thank you so much for taking this time to share your wisdom, your insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt.
Before you leave, if you found this episode valuable, please hit the subscribe button. Also, if you are a creative business owner doing more than 10K a month and you want to grow and scale without working longer hours or hiring a massive team, then I have something you may be interested in. We have just developed a tool that will give you a custom growth strategy based on exactly where you are in your business right now. So you can stop consuming lots of random content and trying to figure things out on your own and actually get something personalized to you. You will also receive a free copy of my book, and it will point out relevant chapters. If you'd like to take the scorecard, it's totally free. You just have to click the link in the show notes or connect with me on LinkedIn, and you will see a link in my bio. Thanks for listening. This is the Creative Courage Podcast.